Alright, so I drew a couple more hands, and now what I'm going to teach is how to achieve depth based on shading. So we did this a little bit in the avocado video, though you couldn't really see a ton of what was going on, and now I'm going to pick some stronger differentiating colors so you can really see how to make something pop. So I'm going to start with this blue hand here. And first things first is just pick a couple colors. You want a dark one and a light one. And I'm not going to start with the midtone in this because I think honestly if some of the black comes through the background for this particular piece, I would actually really like to see that. So I'm just going to add in the highlights and the shadows. And then if I choose to put in the midtones in between those, that's what I'll end up doing. But first things first, like I said with the last video, is you really have to figure out what are highlights and what are shadows. And in this instance, there's pretty uniform light everywhere. You can see there's shadows on my face in this weird shape because of my beret. And you can see there's a shadow on my neck. And honestly, spotting shadows and highlights is something that comes yet again with a lot of practice, but it's also something you can really easily achieve by just taking a picture of something and then switching it into black and white on your camera or on your phone, and then that'll give you a really good idea of where the shadows are. So I don't really do that anymore just because I've been doing it so often that I know where the highlights and the shadows are. But when I started out, I would literally take pictures of every apple, every avocado, everything I was drawing, and then really amp up the contrast and then do it in black and white. So I'll do it for this video too. So I'm going to take just a picture of my hand, and then, oh boy, that's not helpful. But I'm going to just completely shift it into black and white. So in this instance, it actually wasn't, you can't even see, it wasn't super helpful because the lighting was just too uniform, but what I did really see that I wouldn't necessarily pick up otherwise is that the more you curve your hands, the more shadows you get on the tips of your fingers because there's no longer direct light hitting them. So I'm gonna, and it's interesting because this is just two-dimensional, but based on how I shade it, I can actually change how 3D or how bent the fingers look with this shading technique. So first things first, I'm just going to come in here with whatever's the darkest color, and it's really hard to do that with the blue, particularly because it's on a black background, but I think it'll still kind of achieve what I want it to. So start with the different, I guess they're not knuckles, but the segments of the fingers. You just want to come in here and roughly sketch out, okay, there's these three segments. Where do they roughly lie on the finger? And the more you do it, the more you realize, obviously there's going to be a segment where the finger is attached to the hand. That's, pretty clear. And then there's going to be, one up here and then one closer to the tip. And that's a good rule of thumb. Although you'll see that thumbs are actually shaded really differently, especially because, they literally come in at a different angle. So light is never going to hit it uniformly. Even when the light is coming directly at it, it's still going to be shaded differently. So continuing to come up here, and then the pinky is also going to be angled. It's angled a little more outward, so I'm going to have more shadow come in up here along the knuckle. Just try to get those shadows in. And then we're going to come over here. I'm imagining that the light, let's see, how do I want to do this? The light is going to come in at an angle from the top. And that's normally true for most things. It's a little bit different for what's going on right now because there's a lot of ambient light, which makes it harder to draw from reality. But basically, for the most part, a good rule of thumb is that things on the bottom of the painting are going to be darker than things on the top because the light is always going to be coming from above. And you can break that rule of painting as soon as you're painting, other things, but it's good to know the rules in the first place. Another quick way to make things three-dimensional is to make the top and bottom darker than the front. We talked about this a little bit with the pit and the avocado, but it really helps things pop when there's just like a differentiation. Like even though this isn't the highlight and this should be the highlight, it's just because these are different colors, it automatically is perceived as a changing of light because of the way our brains are structured. So that's kind of useful. And then coming in with the thumb, I'm going to put whatever is further away from you should be darker. So even though this part of the thumb is like the top and should be getting the most light, because it's coming in at an angle, the light is coming in from the top, but this is more towards the back, it's still going to be shaded like that. And then obviously you're going to have some wrinkles where the wrist meets the meat of the hand. That's going to come in like that. And then you can put in, you know, other differentiating markers of the hand, just the different shapes, the different lines. I'm completely changing any palmistry reading I'd have by just having really different shadows. But that's cool. So now I'm going to come in with a really, really light color. I mean, I really like the way this looks now, and in another universe, I might leave it this way. But I think I'm going to add in some highlight, mostly because I want to even out these fingers. So the first thing is I'm going to come in here, just kind of straighten things out. Alright. So, it's like very bright. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to blend it in, which is one of the benefits of oil pastels, is that they blend really easily. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. It's really hard to determine when you should just completely shade something in and when you should leave it be. I think in this instance it's probably beneficial to just go for it and then add more contrast on top. So yeah, let's do that. And sometimes you have to make snap decisions like that. When you make something that really changes the way that the painting looks, initially you're going to be like, oh, I don't know if I want to change that, I don't know if that's the right move. But the worst thing that happens is that you color on top of it and you color it back the same exact color that it used to be. If I want, I could come in here with a darker pastel and completely undo everything I did. But sometimes it's better to just go with it and see what happens. I know that some of, and this is another like really important lesson in art, some of the things that have been like the biggest mistakes in the paintings I've done, you know, other people have like really liked. And so it's just kind of like, you know, everything is intentional. We never make mistakes, and whatever people like, you know, you just gotta pretend it was all planned. I'm kidding, but I think putting in this bright color is a good idea. I was doing a series of, and I'm still working on this series of paintings and drawings based on a couple of my artistic influences, including Edward Gorey, who did a lot of illustrations of very macabre children's books that aren't children's books, and also Mobius, who's a French illustrator. And these were both like very subconscious influences until I realized that the things I was drawing were really just the products of watching a lot of cartoons and then reading a lot of their work. And I kind of came to this like magical creature called the Gobi, and they're very much like this. They're these bright neon, kind of weird, squiggly alien creatures, and they have a lot of just weird colors and weird textures and weird lines. And initially, the way they came about is I was drawing people, like just trying to draw normal figures because I've never taken a figure drawing class, and I didn't know how to draw their heads, and so I just drew these like really weird, elongated necks, and that turned into heads. And then I was like, you know what, these are just now a thing. This was all intentional, and I just drew a bunch of them, and I painted a bunch of them, and now they're like everywhere. So sometimes you just gotta go roll with the punches. Okay, so for this, I'm gonna fill in these last couple bits of black that didn't get filled in on the first pass, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back in and add more contrast. Okay. See, it is really challenging not being able to edit these videos and crop things out. You can see all of my mistakes. So just add back in those lines that we originally had and add back in some of those shadows. Give back the three-dimensionality. I'm just going to wrap that up really fast. Yeah. Then blend it back out again. You get the idea. And honestly, the great thing with oil pastel is that you can do this as many times as you want. And the layers just build up, and it never has to be perfect, it never has to be right. You just keep going. I've had skeletons I've drawn where I've done this, redone the skull like 40 different layers of colors, and it still doesn't look quite right to me, and I'm just grappling with that. But for the moment, I think this is pretty good. You kind of get the idea that what I would probably do next, and what I might do after this video, is just add in more detail to the fingers. But what I really like is that in these areas that I let the black show through, it actually creates shadow without me having to add the darker blue. And it still adds like a little bit more texture and interest. But yeah, that's pretty straightforward. I'm gonna shade in this a little bit, and that's probably all I'm gonna do here. All right. You get this lovely result at the end. All right. Thank you so much for watching, and see what happens next.